I watched an interview yesterday with Mind Valley guy Vishen Lakhiani.
Yeah, that's not how you pronounce it, but go ahead.
Sorry.
Lakhiani.
Lakhiani. That was so close.
You were great. You're doing great.
And a woman who runs Daybreaker. I don't remember her name.
Daybreakers is the non-alcohol 6 a.m. party?
6 a.m. party.
Yeah, my sister loved those.
So really interesting, man, and exposed where we messed up and I think continue to mess up in like, oh, we'll have a Charisma University community. And we're like, we'll start a Facebook group.
Yeah.
And she talks about, one, community as essential to happiness, which is really interesting.
Yeah.
But two, I wrote a lot of notes because these are interesting for business.
Well, it's an incredible Daybreakers for people that don't know what it is. It's a pretty impressive thing because it is normally on a weekday. It's a completely sober party.
That's Wednesday at 6
a.m.
before
work.
Wednesday at 6 a.m.
And
is when they hold them.
people love it. They show up. My sister used to go. She had a 9 to 6 job or whatever. And she would get up and put on a costume and you go do yoga and then dance or whatever it is.
6 a.m. yoga, 7 a.m.
That's
dance till 9.
It's the most inconvenient thing you could possibly imagine on a work day. And droves of people show up.
Yeah.
So it's a very, very impressive thing.
So how they started it is really interesting. She said she spent 30 to 35 making friends. Like that was her goal. Was she's like, I don't like my community. I need more community.
Wow.
She gets this
I
co-founder.
respect that she stuck with that for 5 years.
Yeah. So they start Daybreaker in New York City. It's like December 10th or something. It's the first snowfall in New York, the date that they set. They handpicked, of all the people they knew, 300 people. And they spent days going over which people were going to be on this list to do it. 180 of them, which is insane, showed up for an event that didn't exist at 6 a.m. on a Wednesday, the first snowfall in New York City.
Yeah, it's crazy.
And she's like, the effort that I put into cultivating this first one is the reason that it exists today. Because
that's basically as long as we've been trying to start our business at all. It's 5 years. That's a huge commitment.
Yes. And then there's a ton of interesting things about community. She says ritual, which is when you think of church and all that, is so underestimated, and particularly entrance rituals and exit rituals. So they really crafted, okay, when you come into a bar, you get ID'd, you get looked at like a piece of meat. Are you pretty enough? In some clubs in New York, you can't even come in. This one, since they don't have to ID, everybody gets a hug. So they greet you with a hug, and if you're not cool with a hug, you get a high five, and they've worked on what to say if someone doesn't want a hug. So the entrance is a ritual that you come to expect, you get excited for, and it pumps you up.
Yeah.
During the event, they've purposely thought about dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, and endorphins.
Yeah.
And they've crafted the entire event to have each of these at particular moments.
Wow.
Yeah, so you get the hug, you got your oxytocin. Okay, the serotonin, they've instructed the DJ to talk about how they're part of something larger, how they're part of a bigger thing. You get your endorphins from dancing. The dopamine is from, I forget, something else. And they have them like scheduled, structured. Yeah. And yeah, they end with a purposeful like reading a poem, and it's a different poem every time, but you can anticipate it. So just really, really interesting how the experience of this event was highly crafted with psychology in mind.
Yeah.
And particularly these chemicals and what it takes to get all 4 of your happy chemicals going. And if you do that, you have raving fans.
That's awesome.
Yeah. You just go, here's your chemical cocktail of happiness in 3 hours. You can predict it every time. It's a little bit different every time.
Do you want to go? I'll do a 6 a.m.
I don't like change. This is a classic example of like, yes, I would probably be happy, but waking up at 6 a.m. would be miserable. I would check it out though. I'll go. I just now the element of consistency is so stuck on me. If you'd asked me prior to having said all of this, I'd be like, no way. I woke up at 11:10 today, man. Yeah. 6 a.m. I might as well just stay up until 6 a.m. But yeah, so they got the serotonin, they got all that. They give their guys one-liners to say, which are to boost that. The other thing is that they're very careful about the language that they use. She says, I think this is the most underrated thing. Inside words, a particular way of speaking to someone that is what crafts like a community. And if you think of any subreddit, they've got memes that you can't understand. There's a barrier. There's jargon at the very least. Yeah. There's some sort of barrier to entry.
I actually question. I mean, listen, she's obviously more of an expert than I am, but I question that to some degree because I know, for instance, in like the spiritual world or the ayahuasca world or whatever it might be, they have insider words that pushed me away for a time. They would say things, talk about things like pseudoscience, misuse of what it means to be vibrating atoms and stuff like that, or whatever it was. They have like hippy dippy woo woo words that made me go, I don't want to do this. So I think having
what were they trying to do with those words? This is the question.
This is the thing. So certain insider jargon can actually be ostracizing, I think.
Who you're speaking to is important. You need to know how to modulate. When you're talking at the event and you're there and 98% of the people are bought in, you got to talk with the woo-woo stuff, man. You got to say it.
Yeah.
When you're inviting your friend to come, you need to know how to speak to him. I think
Landmark Forum does this poorly as well.
Yeah.
They have these code words. Basically, I don't want to say anything negative about them. Well, I do, but I won't say anything negative about them. But they have words that they change.
This is a podcast for honesty, Ben.
I'm just trying not to get a lawsuit, dude. They're very aggressive.
Oh, really?
Yeah. But anyway,
interesting.
They have words that they will change the meaning of or have you use much more than anyone would actually use.
Oh, like enrollment?
Sure. And so
yeah,
it's sometimes weird when people come out of the 2-day Landmark experience and they're, super high on it and their diction is changed.
Interesting.
And then they go to talk to you and you weren't there and you're just like, this isn't how humans speak. You're misusing these words. You're overusing these words. And it's making me feel like you're in a cult.
Yes.
And that's a very common complaint that they get. So I'm not trying
yes.
to I'm not trying to take away from this woman,
I think it adds an element of I think it only reinforces what she's saying. That buys people in. They're in this and there's an in-group and an out-group. Now the question is, how do you manage the fact that the out-group is
pushes the out-group away.
Exactly. So how do you manage that tension is an interesting problem to deal with. Like, to recognize that yes, we have these words, but we don't dump these on people. And I think Scientology might have gotten this right in that they kind of walk you up the steps of weirdness.
Yeah.
And like, you don't find out until that they seeded volcanoes until the final level. They don't tell people when they come in. They talk about personal development and all this stuff. So maybe it's something like that is what you're aiming for. But I just thought it was interesting. She's clearly built this thing that people are into, and she's a designer. This is the other thing that we just don't have. She's like, the aesthetics are so important. What's your font? What's your colors? I'm like, all the fonts. Whichever one is default on the current app that I'm using. What colors? I don't know. How do I feel that day? Probably black or brown.
Maybe yellow, blue, green.
Yellow, blue, green.
Red. Who knows?
We have no sort of. Yeah, I'm just not visual like that, and we have some team members that are good at that, but we haven't built it into the business. So yeah, we've done a poor job at this point.
That's dope though. I'm super game to go to Daybreakers.
Yeah, that wasn't the lesson.
You're contractually obligated. You have to now.